We've lived through this period in which platforms have found ways to lock us in, right? They've bought their competitors so we don't have anywhere else to go. They have used software locks to stop us from modifying their products. They have captured their regulators so that even the worst things they do to us are somehow legal. And as a result, you see things like, say, the quantum of material that you asked for in your Facebook feed being dialed down to a kind of homeopathic residue, leaving behind a big void that's filled with things that people are paying to shove in it. And those people, the advertisers, the publishers who are paying to boost their content, they're not getting a good deal either. They're also getting ripped off to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars a year. It's not that we have like a class alliance between advertisers and platforms to screw users. It's platforms versus the world, and they're winning.
The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to the Amber Mack Show. Coming up on this week's show, author, activist, and journalist Cory Doctorow joins us to talk about why everything is worse and what to do about it. And speaking of things that are worse, we tell you about the big tech players who are paying for Trump's new White House ballroom. And we also unpack how TikTok and Meta broke transparency rules under the EU's landmark tech law.
Well, and speaking of broken things, we'll also talk about how an AI metal detector at a school in the U.S. flagged a Doritos bag as a gun, which is a bit of a terrifying and bizarre story. And we'll tell you which Oscar-winning director likened tech bros' irresponsible AI obsession to the blind arrogance of Victor Frankenstein. But before we give too much away, let's get into the headlines.
Newsfeed.
Well, Jeff, it's been hard to miss stories about Trump demolishing the east wing of the White House to construct his 90,000 square foot presidential ballroom, which he had promised would leave the east wing totally untouched. There is definitely a tech tie-in to this story in terms of who is essentially funding the construction.
Yeah, and the project is being funded not by taxpayers, so that's good, but funded by hundreds of millions of dollars. And the number seems to change a little bit depending on who's saying it and when, but at least hundreds of millions of dollars in private donations. And it may not be surprising to learn that these are largely from major companies like Amazon, Google, Meta, Apple, Microsoft, along with some big crypto interests, some defense contractors, and even a couple telecom companies to boot, all of whom, as anyone can well imagine, have reasons to want to curry favor with America's most transactional president ever.
This is all a little sus, as the kids say. And speaking of other Trump-driven changes, with respect to law enforcement and border security, including expanding the use of facial recognition tech to track people who are entering and leaving the U.S. Starting late December, U.S. border authorities can require non-Americans to be photographed at airports and border crossings. And Jeff, it's worth mentioning that the regulations really leave open the possibility of collecting fingerprints or DNA as well.
Yeah, and apparently it might take, I think the estimate was maybe up to 5 years to get all of these things in place, but I think they have the permission to do it as of December 26th or late December or something of this year. So that's kind of crazy. And, too much reliance on tech does have some dangerous consequences from time to time. And a teenager in Baltimore recently discovered that when his high school's AI-powered security system thought that a scrunched up empty bag of chips in his pocket was a gun. And this resulted in a bunch of police cars arriving on the scene, ordering the teacher to get down on the ground. The kid was like, I thought I was going to die kind of thing. And it was all over a chip bag. So thankfully, no one was hurt. But, we've talked a lot about the damage chatbots can do to kids sort of psychologically, emotionally. I think we might need to pay a little more attention to how the surveillance state is evolving in some potentially dangerous ways as well.
And Jeff, just before we move on to the next story, I wanted to ask you about this because both of us have teenagers who are in high school here in Canada. And I have never, ever heard of any type of system like this as far as AI being used to detect people walking in with weapons. And I think it just really goes to show you that the different type of threat that many students in the U.S. face.
Oh, absolutely. Like the school shooting stuff, it's tragic, but it's what's one of the biggest differences between Canada and the States? And it's just like the old Kids in the Hall skit when they're on the beach in Cuba and the the Cuban kid thinks that the guy on the beach is in America. I guess it's probably in Mexico, not Cuba. But the Mexican kid on the beach is like, "What's a Canadian?" And the Scott Thompson or whoever is like, "It's just like an American, but without a gun." And honestly, it's we've gotten some bigger differences lately, but we just don't see stuff like that in our schools, thankfully, very often at all. And so, yeah, we don't have the same need for that kind of tech, but you can see how things can go wrong. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Now, you talked about the potential bursting of the AI bubble due in part to circular financing in a previous The Other Mac, which is getting a lot of attention online. I think this is a hot topic for so many people. But I think we found yet another example of how giant US companies are engaging in similar questionable practices. Namely, it seems that XAI and SpaceX are buying up considerable numbers of Tesla's Cybertrucks. It should be noted that Cybertrucks are not selling that well at all, which does not surprise me because they are horrific looking vehicles. They don't belong on any of our streets. And it is also worth noting that three of those companies are run by none other than Elon Musk, who has a real vested interest in improving Cybertruck sales.
Yeah, they're like his little babies. So Kelsey there, but yeah, what a shady way to get around that. Uh, in other news about car makers that may make people a bit nervous in terms of the over embracing of technology. It was a few weeks ago now, but let's not forget that there was a software update on some specific line of Jeep hybrids that left some of those vehicles inoperable and included some instances where the Jeeps lost power after the software update had happened. They lost power while they were driving. And so that's obviously very dangerous. And it's a bit weird to think of a software update being able to brick your car.
Absolutely. I do want to mention as well, because we do have Cory Doctorow, who is on this episode. Super excited for everybody to hear that interview.
Mhm.
And one of the things that he talked about, Jeff, at this conference that we recently attended is the fact that many car mechanics are actually paying about $10,000, I think it's a year, to be able to have the privilege, and I put that word privilege in quotes, to be able to basically fix cars like many of the luxury cars out there.
Mhm.
And of course, he's been fighting for the right to repair for a really long time. And I think it's worth mentioning that we've gotten into this place, I think, with vehicles that not only do they have almost too much tech in them, they're increasingly more expensive to be able to repair, and only a few people are able to do just that. So
Yeah,
everything trickles down to more expenses for the end consumer.
no doubt.
Now, want to talk about a story about Electronic Arts. I remember when you worked there, and this was a company that was recently bought by a consortium of buyers in a $55 billion purchase. This is the largest leverage buyout in history. And now Electronic Arts has announced a partnership with Stability AI to quote, co develop transformative AI models, tools, and workflows. As someone who knows EA really well, what do you think of this story?
Well, if you haven't worked inside a big gaming company, you may not realize exactly how many talented people work on a big name video game. Like there, dozens and dozens of people. So I have to imagine there's a lot of people in the mix a bit worried about their jobs. And given that, Stability AI's most famous tool is the AI image generator Stable Diffusion, I expect a lot of those people most worried are artists. And frankly, it's hard as an artist to imagine getting a much higher paying job than you'd get at EA. So I'm sure that's a big worry. Of course, that's not how Electronic Arts or other gaming companies want to paint this kind of adoption, but we'll see. Time will tell.
We are hearing more and more stories in terms of the reaction to AI being used in all type of creative industries. And I think it's fair to say that someone who wouldn't be in favor of this news is director Guillermo del Toro, who was on a press tour for his Frankenstein adaptation. And he said he would rather die than use AI. And he also likened the tech bros behind AI to the arrogant scientist who created Frankenstein's monster, who he said is kind of blind, creating something without considering the consequences. And I have to think we have to take a pause and consider where we're going. So good to hear his perspective on this.
Some very wise words by a very creative guy. So that's totally interesting. Let's hop over the pond a bit. The European Commission has declared that TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram have breached the EU's Digital Services Act. And this requires that researchers have to be able to access these platforms' data to assess the impacts on mental and physical health on users. So specifically, it accused those companies of having, quote, put in place burdensome procedures and tools for researchers to request access to public data. This often leaves them with partial or unreliable data, impacting their ability to conduct research, such as whether users, including minors, are exposed to illegal or harmful content. So, more business as usual for the big social media companies, really.
Jeff, it's really shocking to me that they don't seem to care. I mean, we've kind of gotten to that point, and I made a comment recently that when it comes to some of these big tech companies, there was a point, and maybe I'm not remembering this correctly, but there was a point when they actually did care about the public reaction to what they were doing. They did care about laws that were put in place, but now we've really moved to this period where it is kind of move fast and break things, which goes back to the original days of some of the big tech companies.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it seems that's happened at a societal level in addition to these guys. So I don't know if they're a reflection of us or we're a reflection of them, but you absolutely have the trajectory on that problem pointing the right direction as in it's increasing for sure.
And speaking a little bit more about Meta, it looks like they'll be partnering with military tech company Anduril, who make military drones, border control tech, and lots more to create an AI powered mixed reality helmet system called Eagle Eye. Like, I mean, cringeworthy.
Now, I have to say, as a guy who grew up watching Vietnam movies and spent a couple years in the Armed Forces Reserve, having worked in a video game industry, this actually seems sort of cool to me. uh, and the way I look at it is, it's not an offensive weapon. If this can help save military lives and civilian lives, then that's great. And to be very clear, I sure don't feel the same way about killer AI drones or those terrifying robot dogs. So, but this could be helpful and looks like it's not as problematic as a lot of things they've been working on.
Yeah, I'm probably a little bit tainted by some of the things that Meta has done. So anytime you say military tech and Meta, I get sort of a reaction that is akin to vomiting. So that might be part of it. Well, listen, if they wanted to make long marches easier on soldiers, then they could really look to Nike's new Project Amplify, which the company calls the world's first powered footwear system to boost running and walking speeds. This is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Apparently, it still is in that testing phase, but it's one of a few of tech related forays that Nike has recently announced.
Yeah, I think they got like 400 people testing it now, and it's interesting to see like a footwear company coming up with a tech product. So that's something about the times we're in. But yeah, pretty cool. And my understanding is it's more for like casual use. It's not for competitive sports and stuff. But speaking of competitive sports, why don't we close off with a fun sports related story? Obviously, Canada's only league baseball team, the Toronto Blue Jays, has made the World Series. But it's looking like there's a bit of a downside if you're a home team fan living closer to the Rogers Centre in Toronto where the games are played, Amber.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a little like if you switch from streaming CBC radio on your phone to listening to it in the car when you head to work. There is a time lag between the live broadcast and the streaming broadcast. Well, it looks like the time difference between hearing the Rogers Stadium erupt when the Jays get a home run and seeing the home run streaming on your TV can actually be in the area of around 30 seconds. So maybe you want to watch with some noise canceling headphones. That's probably a good idea if you are living nearby. This is a really interesting story. I would never have thought of this. Now, if you thought you were being gouged by pricing for baseball tickets, and last time I looked, I mean, they're in the thousands and thousands of dollars, then just wait to hear what's playing out with Amazon's sales prices. Jeff, you have that coming up next in The Other Mac.
The Other Mac.
Amazon has come a long way from Jeff Bezos' online books marketplace of 1994 to end up as the world's largest online retailer. While statistics vary, Amazon probably counts for around 40% of e-commerce in both the US and Canada. And one of the big ways that Amazon attracts its customers, at least since they started doing these things in 2015, is through its big discount events like Prime Days and Black Friday, Cyber Monday sales. But are these sales good value to consumers, or are they just a marketing ploy to attract people who might not do the research to tell the difference between what's a good deal and what isn't? Well, there's been lots of stories about this. Reddit is certainly full of them, but recently there was a great article by Jeffrey A. Fowler in the Washington Post, which I should note is owned by Jeff Bezos, Amazon's founder. And he did this after the fall 2025 Amazon Prime Days sales and concluded that, quote, "I would have saved on average almost nothing during Amazon's recent fall big deal Prime Days. And for some big ticket purchases, I would have actually paid more." All in all, he concluded that his big deal day savings were only 0.6%, 0.6%. And that doesn't even consider the annual fee to be an Amazon Prime member. And this kind of thing's been going on for a while, with the consumer watchdog in 2017 reporting that 61% of the reference prices that Amazon uses to calculate the sales price were higher than at any point during the previous 90 days. And Canada's Competition Bureau actually fined Amazon for these kinds of practices around that time. Fast forward to this fall, and a class action suit was launched in the US that accuses Amazon of misleading consumers with false discounts during Prime Day sales. So basically, the scam part of this is the percentage discount that Amazon shows you're getting on an item, for instance, 40% off, is based on a price that was artificially raised so that they can calculate and post a larger discount, not infrequently resulting in a sales price that is not substantially different from the regular price despite the savings claim. Regardless, Amazon said its fall 2025 event was its biggest ever, and claimed that customers saved billions on deals. It's important to remember that this is the company that was recently ordered to pay a $2.5 billion fine, the largest ever in this type of case, by the FTC for deceptive Amazon Prime enrollment practices and making it exceedingly difficult to cancel an Amazon Prime membership. So remember that, they are categorically engaging in shady practices in other ways beyond deceptive sales. So use this as a factor when you're calculating how much trust you should give Amazon. But does this mean that you shouldn't shop at Amazon? Well, I feel obliged to say that consumerism is absolutely out of control in our society, and there are people who are literally addicted to shopping. So the first thing to ask yourself is, do you really need the thing you're thinking about buying? If you do, then I'd say the next thing to ask yourself is, could you support a local business by buying it somewhere in your community, even if it costs a little more? But if we're just talking about getting better prices, then it's more about making sure that you do your research to know whether you're being gouged versus when the deal is legitimate. So make sure to compare prices outside of Amazon. You can use Google, or try out a tool like camel.com, which is a free price tracker for Amazon products, or keepa.com, keepa.com, or other similar offerings. So it's not that there aren't any deals, it's just that a lot of what are called deals aren't really deals at all. So as the old saying goes, buyer beware. I'm the Other Mac. Caveat emptor.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Taylor Owen is the Beaverbrook Chair in Media Ethics and Communications, the founding director of the Center for Media Technology and Democracy, and an associate professor in the Max Bell School of Public Policy at McGill University. He's also the host of the popular podcast Machines Like Us. He joined Amber to talk about a recent event the center hosted called Attention, Govern or Be Governed.
Taylor, tell me a little bit about the Attention Forum and this event, which is all about govern or be governed.
Yeah, happy to. And thanks for joining us at it. Look, we think we're in this pretty unique moment right now where a lot of people around the world have spent the last 10 to 20 years, really, trying to figure out how to govern this new set of digital technologies that we all live with. And for a long time, that was social media, right? Like you've talked about this for years and years yourself and written about it, that with all the benefits of these technologies have also come these real harms that governments have struggled with how to govern. And we think we're in a bit of a different moment now. AI has changed that debate again. The problems are more complicated. They might even be worse. And we have a US government who is kind of pushing back against countries who are trying to regulate and govern. So we wanted to bring the international community of people who are leading these policy efforts and these governance efforts together to try and strategize on how we can handle this moment.
It's really amazing to get all of these people in one room. One of the things that's been remarkable for me being part of this event is that sometimes I feel like I'm talking as a little island, off to the side, and then to see hundreds of people in one space who are all focused on this specific problem.
Yeah.
How do you feel about this moment in time in terms of some of the solutions that have come up at the event?
Well, I think the people in a room together from around the world is what's key to it. That we're all facing the same problems. It can feel in Canada and UK and France and Brazil and Indonesia and Malaysia, all the countries that are dealing with these problems, it can feel like you're isolated and on an island. I know it does in Canada sometimes, right? That our policy debates are all our debates. But to hear that we're all facing almost the exact same problems and that the solutions are in part to act together. And I think there's real power potentially in smaller countries that aren't the US or China, right? In this new digital world, the US and China can do what they want, right? They are going to control in many ways these technologies as they have for the last 20 years. But if you're not the US and China, we probably need to be working together. So that means developing common policies and governance tools, right? So we're asking the same things of these technologies, but it also means building things together. It means coming up with common technologies that we co-develop that are designed to meet what we think are our democratic interests, as opposed to what we're worried about increasingly are the autocratic or liberal interests of the countries that are developing.
It was really interesting on day one. There was a comment that Canada sometimes can be a wait and see country. And I think this is true when it comes to any type of guardrails around technology.
It has been so far, yeah. And to our detriment, honestly. I mean, we've been very slow to this. When you look at what Europe's done, now what a lot of the global democratic South is doing, they're leapfrogging us, right? Many countries in the world have looked at the things we talked about doing, like our online safety bill, for example. We didn't do it. We didn't actually pass it. And now other countries are using that as a model and passing it themselves. So there are other countries that are using the thought and work we've done in Canada to develop some solutions, but didn't have the political will to pass. And their citizens are now safer than ours on the internet. And it's dispiriting to see that. But again, countries are learning from each other. This is not just a national exercise. So we are part of this bigger conversation globally, and hopefully bringing some of these global figures to Canada will pressure us or shame us or embarrass us into maybe stepping up, right? Like hearing the EU commissioner yesterday describing what Europe is doing and how they view this issue, not just as an issue of speech and of liberty and of personal safety, and all those things are important in their discourse, but of the future of their democracy. Like the starkness with which he put that, I found striking, because you don't hear it talked about like that here. But maybe bringing international figures to Canada will force us to think a bit more seriously, frankly, about this challenge.
It's always been something that's puzzled me over the years. I'm thinking back to even covering elections and sort of wondering out loud that many of our political leaders didn't really have a good grasp on how our digital landscape worked. I worry a little bit as we go into this next phase of AI, although I think we're trying here a little bit harder.
Without question.
Which is an amazing thing, I think, for us that we can sort of make up maybe some of that lost time.
I'm always nervous to blame politicians' knowledge of tech as the source of the problem. Like, I don't think politicians have a great knowledge of how drugs are developed, yet they regulate the pharmaceutical sector, right? So, we have governments, and I think it matters if our civil service knows these technologies, and I think it matters if the government is consulting with people who understand these technologies or not, right? So I think that matters. But I think more is the issue with the politicians is not their grasp of how a technology technically works or not, but the effect it's having on society. Like, do they understand how citizens view these technologies? Do they understand, and are they listening to the trade-offs of them, right? Because I think there's a risk that politicians, because of who they speak to, because of who has access to them, because of who influences them, that they're hearing one version of this possible future. And one version of AI, if we go to your question around AI, could be amazing, right? Maybe it is the solution to our productivity problems. Maybe it will bring us closer together, right? Maybe it will turbocharge our economy and our individual productivity and agency in the world. But it could do the opposite, right? And there are people who are already being harmed by this technology. And I think it's incumbent on governments to listen to those people too, and to develop a governance agenda, to come back to the theme of the conference, that balances those two, right? That doesn't just try and turbocharge this sector, but does it in a way that also prioritizes the guardrails that increasingly we know need to be there, right? People are being harmed by this stuff as we speak, and it's incumbent on them to take that seriously.
Tell me a little bit about some of the work that you're doing at the center, because you've been in this space for a long time.
Yeah. We do three things. We run something called the Media Ecosystem Observatory, which studies the information ecosystem. It studies all the ways we as citizens use technologies and all the ways we speak and share information in public about using them. So we try and get a sense of the nature of our democratic discourse and the benefits and harms within it. Then we develop policy based on that. So we do active policy development. We try and research policies that have worked around the world. We study what works and what doesn't, and we try and work with governments to develop research-informed policies based on that knowledge. And then we do things like this event, this podcast. We try and communicate with wide publics. So we run a nonprofit on the side called Paradigms, which leads our public engagement. We've produced podcasts, multiple ones. We do big public events, and we do media that tries to communicate what we've learned to as many people as possible.
And there is public interest. I mean, even if I think about your podcast, Machines Like Us, I see it rising up in the tech charts in Canada, often surpassing our podcast.
Well, I was going to say, alongside yours, we're chasing.
Alongside.
We're chasing.
I don't know about that. But I think there is public interest. And I think that's the one piece, for me at least, if I want to remain optimistic about this whole conversation, is that at the end of the day, especially I've heard these comments during this event, it might be the public who actually pushes everybody in a better direction.
I mean, I think if we go in a better direction, it will only be because of that. And the challenge for us both and anyone trying to communicate this conversation is to do it in a way that resonates with the way people are using and feeling these technologies. And it's not necessarily about policy levers and about big power dynamics between countries and states. It's about how people are living with these technologies. And to come back to AI, people in Canada for sure are deeply, deeply worried. 78% of Canadians are worried that AI is going to take their job. If that's not a driving issue for policy and for change, I don't know what will be, right? 80% of parents think AI could harm their kids. These are stark numbers. This wasn't the case with social media. Everyone loved social media, right? And yet there were harms, but now people are really, really skeptical of this thing we're asking them to adopt. And I think it's incumbent on all of us who study it, who understand it, or try to understand it and want to develop solutions for it, to speak with the people who are living with it and find out how they want it to be better.
Thanks, Taylor and Amber. Coming up next, the one and only Cory Doctorow joins us to talk about his new book, which breaks down why everything suddenly got worse and what we can do about it.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Cory Doctorow is a science fiction author, an activist, and a journalist. He has written dozens of books, most recently the non-fiction work In Shitification, Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It. Amber spoke with Cory at the Attention, Govern, or Be Governed conference about the state of tech. Here's their conversation.
I have followed you for many years. We've met a few times. You have written a number of books. This book feels a little bit different. It's a really interesting moment in time. How would you describe it?
The time or the book?
The time.
Well, we've had a quarter century of tinkering in the margins with tech policy because the big swings, the things that really stood in the way of people having the technology they deserved, were off the table because the US Trade Representative had threatened the world's countries with tariffs if they made it possible to modify the technology America exported. And now we have tariffs. And look, it's not good, but it's good for this. There's a policy space that's just opened up that I've been waiting for all my life. And while I'm terrified on a daily basis about the ICE goons kidnapping people in my neighborhood, I am quite excited about what this means for the world.
So let's talk about the book. So it's called Enshittification, which is a phrase that you coined, that many have borrowed over the past
With my blessing.
many of us. It's with your blessing. And the subtitle is Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It. So can you talk a little bit about what you think has actually gotten worse?
Yeah. So we've lived through this period in which platforms have found ways to lock us in, right? They've bought their competitors so we don't have anywhere else to go. They have used software locks to stop us from modifying their products. They have captured their regulators so that even the worst things they do to us are somehow legal. And as a result, you see things like, say, the quantum of material that you asked for in your Facebook feed being dialed down to a kind of homeopathic residue, leaving behind a big void that's filled with things that people are paying to shove in it. And those people, the advertisers, the publishers who are paying to boost their content, they're not getting a good deal either. They're also getting ripped off to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars a year. It's not that we have like a class alliance between advertisers and platforms to screw users. It's platforms versus the world, and they're winning.
It's interesting. I'm thinking of a video I often show in my keynotes. It's of the founder of Patagonia who's sitting down with a journalist. This is in 2013. And the business journalist says to the founder of Patagonia, "You remind me a lot of Steve Jobs." And the founder of Patagonia says to him, I hate that comparison. Steve Jobs won't even let you open up an iPhone and do anything to it.
Yeah.
And I always show this video and people kind of are taken back because I think people have really sort of misunderstood that you should be able to own your data to fix your own technology.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a kind of vulgar Thatcherism practiced by the tech companies. Thatcher used to say there is no alternative. She said it so often, they sometimes called her Tina Thatcher. There is no alternative. And what she meant was stop trying to think of an alternative, right? She wanted to extinguish our imagination. And that's something that tech bosses do. Mark Zuckerberg wants you to think that asking to have a conversation with your friends that he isn't privy to is not just like unreasonable, but irrational. It's like asking for water that isn't wet. Tim Cook wants you to think that having a phone that works reliably is impossible unless you let him take 30 cents out of every dollar you give to a performer or a software publisher or a news organization through an app. And Sundar Pichai, who runs Google, he wants you to think that searching the web is impossible unless he gets to spy on you from Apple to Appetite.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, I think, terrifying reality. And, Scott Galloway, who I listen to pretty regularly, he calls it the complexity illusion. The fact that we are made to think that technology is a lot more complex
Sure.
than it actually is.
Yeah.
I've seen this my entire career. One of the things I saw you just speak about at the end of your presentation is some of the solutions, some of the things that individuals can do because we are not without power.
Well, I would quibble with that. I don't think there's much we can do as individuals. I think that billionaires would really like you to vote with your wallet because their wallets are thicker than yours and they're going to win that election. I think that like agonizing over your consumption choices is a waste of time. Like, sure, if you think that, Mastodon or Blue Sky would be better for your mental health than Twitter, then go ahead and use it. But don't kid yourself that that's going to change your social media landscape. The way you get involved is as a polity, not as an individual, as a citizen, not as a consumer. And so that means you get involved in party politics. You join the BC Civil Liberties Association or the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. You get involved with open media, CIPIC, all of these organizations now that have popped up. There's SHIELD and there's the Canadian Anti-Monopoly Project. There's all of these different projects that have popped up around Canada to make policy changes, not to like let you shop a little better, right? You can't fix monopoly by shopping hard any more than you can stop the wildfires by recycling really carefully.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really good point. And I think if people are more involved, unfortunately, I think we have citizens who sometimes are a little apathetic about
Well,
certain
because
issues.
no one's offered them a way out, right? We've been, again, like this is vulgar Thatcherism. We've forgotten that we can act as citizens. We think that the only way we can act is as consumers, right? And it's only when we get there. Look, there's a joke from down east. If you wanted to get there, I wouldn't start from here, right? Starting this 40 years after Mulroney and Reagan and Thatcher lobotomized us and made us forget that we could be a part of a polity and that we could act politically rather than as consumers. It's not ideal, but it doesn't change the fact that the only way we're going to make changes to the policy environment, right? This enshitogenic policy environment that makes sure that the worst people on earth are making the worst decisions, running the most profitable companies, then we're just going to be stuck. So you got to do what has to be done.
You are originally from Canada. I know you're familiar with what's going on here politically in this country. Sure. What would you say about what's happening right now in terms of artificial intelligence and digital sovereignty? I mean, these are issues that I think Canada is trying to make a priority in this country. Mm-hmm. What do you think of the general state of things?
Well, I think the move to replace 10,000 civil servants with AI chatbots is a catastrophic blunder. But even if you disagree with me and you're like, no, those chatbots are going to be awesome, we still have a digital sovereignty problem because CUSMA, the trade agreement that we agreed to 5 years ago at Donald Trump's insistence as a successor to NAFTA, has something called the source code chapter. And in the source code chapter of CUSMA, there is a prohibition on governments requiring disclosure of algorithms, of training data, or of any other kind of weights or aspects that would allow you to render legible the decisions being made by automatic systems. And so even if you think we should be making 10,000 of our civil servants redundant and replacing them with AI, wouldn't it be nice if we were legally allowed to know how that AI was deciding whose kids were getting taken away, who was getting parole, which neighborhoods were being singled out for extra policing, who could get a loan or a mortgage, who could get hired? Wouldn't that be at least the minimum standard for prudent procurement, to know how the tools that you're entrusting with decision-making works? Now, I think in some ways it's kind of moot. You have $700 billion in capital expenditures across the AI sector. By their own grossly inflated account, they are making $60 billion a year. They are depreciating those assets that they bought for $700 billion over a 5-year schedule. But when you look at their own books, those GPUs are burning out in 2 to 3 years, which means they have 2 to 3 years to make $700 billion at $60 billion a year. The math doesn't add up. The only thing worse than firing workers and replacing them with chatbots that can't do their job is then having all those chatbots switched off because the foundation model's operating expenses and capital expenditures cannot be recouped in any reasonable way. If we scatter 10,000 civil servants to the wind, discourage them from being in the workforce or have them retrain or emigrate, we're not going to get that expertise back. We're not going to get that process knowledge back of how the system works. We are going to be lobotomizing our own government. So I think it's a catastrophic blunder. But even if you like the idea of a chatbot deciding whether you get to keep your children or whether your family who you're trying to bring over from another country can get citizenship, you should really want to know how that chatbot works.
Just to be clear, I don't like that idea at all. I think it's a terrible idea. One last question for you. I think I heard a little a glimmer of hope around Canada's role and what maybe Canada can do in your presentation. We have been kind of a wait and see country. That's something we've seen at this event. People have said we've sort of, assessed the situation and then eventually we act. It takes us a little while, but we usually do the right thing. What do you think about the role that Canada can play in terms of our technology that we have today?
When you think back on the history of technology before this moment of American hegemony, which is a pretty recent phenomenon, you had a lot of regional success stories, right? Nokia, Finland. Finland was a resource economy before Nokia. Do you know what Nokia did before it made phones?
I do.
They made rubber boots.
Okay.
Right? And it turns out that retooling to make a product that the world wanted was a way to take a small, low population country and make it a global powerhouse. There are a lot of products that are missing in our market right now. If you're a mechanic and you want to fix a car, you have to buy a diagnostic tool to convert the check engine light into something that you can use to fix the car. That diagnostic tool is $10,000 per year per manufacturer, right? The only reason third parties can't make those tools is because we've all signed up to these laws called anti-circumvention laws that the US Trade Representative said if we didn't pass them, we would have to pay tariffs. Well, we're paying tariffs, right? If someone says to you, do as I say, or I'll burn your house down, and then they burn your house down, you don't have to keep doing what they say. We could be exporting a tool to every mechanic in the world that fixes every car in the world for $25 a month. We could have the relationship to auto repair that Finland had to mobile phones for a decade, or that Canada had to mobile phones during the Research in Motion BlackBerry decade, right? We could get that back. We could get that back through third-party app stores. We could get that back through diagnostic and repair tools for tractors and for ventilators and for iPhones. There are so many opportunities going begging, right? These billions of dollars that have been left on the table globally, trillions, that are ours for the taking if we want them. Because we have skilled technologists, we have capital, and Lord knows there's lots of skilled technologists, lots of capital that's leaving America and looking for a safe haven, looking for a better opportunity, a good offer. So a lot of people who'd like to invest in a company whose success factor is not how many Trump coins did you buy. And so this could be us. And if it's not us, someone else is going to do it. So we could either just get the cheap repair tool, or we could have an export market where we sell that cheap repair tool to every mechanic in the world. We can act now, and that's our opportunity.
Thanks, Cory. Next up, I spoke to Sasha Havlicek, CEO of the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, which is an organization dedicated to safeguarding democracy and human rights. We spoke about the state of AI and digital policy around the world.
We've made an enormous amount of progress, I think, in shaping some really important, much needed strategies and policies in a number of places in the world. We've seen real advancements in Europe at the EU level. We've seen real advancements in the UK and Australia. We saw some really interesting moves, I think, in the right direction in Canada, though that legislative package hasn't really advanced now. And so, there were efforts, I think, over the last decade, research organizations like mine, civil society groups, parents groups, organizations representing the interests of people who were really dreadfully affected by online harms, came together in a really effective way, I think, to both educate legislators, perhaps the public writ large, as to how platforms had been contributing to those harms. And I've said this before, but it is a combination of having not enforced their own rules on many of the harms that we see in our day-to-day lives. But more than that, really, the sort of systematic amplification and the recommending of some of the most harmful content to the most susceptible, to the most vulnerable users that I think has been most egregious. And we've seen at times some of their leadership take ownership of that, admit. Zuckerberg himself admitted that the stuff that comes closest to the red line is the stuff that gets most viral traction. It's that piece of it that I think has landed us in the place that we are from a kind of polarization standpoint, from the perspective of the scale of the problem that we're dealing with. And we finally got some progress with legislation that could get some of that properly both transparently exposed to the public, to users, which I think is absolutely critical, and addressed, so that the systems, so that we're essentially building better systems, so that the incentives for safety sort of by design were in place. And so I think it's a really fantastic place. And yet, of course, we've seen a public narrative and a discourse on this issue shift dramatically in the recent period. And so it's now become highly contested. All of this legislative and, all the advancements have become highly contested. And that's in part because I think there's been a very effective political campaign that's brought together certain elements within the political establishment with the technopolistic giants, under one umbrella to sort of roll back some of these advancements. And they have different interests in doing that. So I think we're at a tricky moment. The question is whether we'll have the gumption, the political will to continue to move forward.
And it's an interesting time in that I think what we're seeing right now is that for years we've been trying to basically get our hands on social media to be able to make it safer. And then all of a sudden at the same time, we have the rise of AI. You mentioned algorithms, for example. And now we're seeing them being almost one and the same. We saw OpenAI launch the Sora app where people basically can have a feed of AI generated content. How does this change the game?
It makes all of the things that we've been working on 10 times as wrong, maybe 100,000, maybe 1,000,000 times more important and more urgent. And much of the policy infrastructure that's been put in place over the last sort of decade is so relevant to the AI space. And so I would say it is all the more important, therefore, to see the enforcement of that regulation. Yes, there are gaps. But if we don't do the enforcement of the existing regulation, then we're really going to be in a very, very troubling place. It's an important, good start, and then we're going to need to do. But when I think of the kinds of everything from the kinds of information operations by hostile authoritarian states that we monitor to terrorist and violent extremist recruitment online, all of the bad actors that you can think of. Commercial disinformation actors, the whole sort of gamut of bad actors now obviously effectively are deploying AI, in all sorts of more and less sophisticated ways. I worry that, we're only primarily talking about AI generated content right now, but actually it's the ways in which AI may be utilized around the distribution of, let's say, inauthentic coordinated activity that could be even more damaging and less visible, less detectable. And those things, if we don't get our heads around soon, I think are going to be, potentially seismically more impactful in harmful ways.
When I listen to you speak, and I've watched some of your interviews and some of the work that you've done, one of the things that I notice is you remain a little bit more optimistic than some people I've heard in this space. One of the things that you said today at the Attention Forum is that progress is possible. What keeps you optimistic?
Because a ton of progress has been made. I mean, we forget this. We have now coalitions of organizations working really strategically on evidencing harms, and policies and regulation have in fact been put in place. We do need, of course, to continue those efforts in order to make sure that they are enforced properly. But a lot of progress has been made. Also, where there's a will, there's a way. I mean, we are an ingenious species. I have enormous hope and confidence that often it takes us getting to a place where we dramatize the crisis before us to get our acts together. We definitely need more investment in doing this right. Whether whatever issue you are concerned about solving, if we don't get a handle on the information ecosystem, if we don't ultimately invest in solutions to this crisis that we're facing in the information ecosystem, we will not see advancements on those issues. And whether you're worried about national security, whether you're worried about personal safety, whether you're worried about your kids' safety, whether you're worried about climate change or public health, ultimately the information ecosystem is a first order challenge. And getting to a place where you have an actual free market of speech and ideas, a competition of ideas in I believe that needs to be regulated in a transparent and accountable information ecosystem is the fundament to of course, democratic environments. It's the fundament to our safety. So it is a first order challenge for all of us. And I think that the penny's dropping on that front slowly. And so I have hope that we can resolve these problems when we put our heads together. We're going to need to think in strategic ways and pull people to the table on this set of issues from all of these different sectors and segments.
Last question for you. A lot of our listeners, they're not policymakers, or they're not necessarily academics, but they are parents and they are worried about this issue. Is there anything that the average person can do?
Yes. I think that we need to, all of us, do a better job of informing ourselves about how this stuff actually works. And ISD does some of this both with kids and with adults, but digital literacy, the kind of digital hygiene 101, I think is critical. Do you know how your data is being mined? Do you know how that's then used to target you online? Do you know why you're seeing something so different to your neighbor? Do you know why your child is being targeted with certain types of content? Do you know what a rabbit hole really looks like and what that pathway, what that potentially radicalizing online algorithmic pathway is for your kid? I see it. And we've done experiments about this, but as a parent, I see it. You have a minor engaging with totally innocuous content, but a certain combination of engagements will lead you weirdly into a very, very dark place very, very, very quickly. Understanding those pathways, being in a position to really prevent that from happening with your child, but also standing up, talk to your representative, whichever country you're from, talk to your democratic representative at a local level, at a state level, at a national level, start writing those letters, say, I've had enough of this. And there are ways, I think, for us to connect the dots and organize ourselves as parents to really start to get a handle on these issues. I mean, we're seeing now the kinds of things that are happening through, AI-enabled AI chatbots, the ways in which they are engaging with kids. I mean, these are things any rational person understands could be, vilely problematic. So we've entered into an era of mass manipulation. So, these are the weapons of mass manipulation. And AI just sort of aggravates that in a big way. And so we need, in the context of weapons of mass manipulation, we really do need strategies that bring all of us to the table. I do think you only get at this if you do have citizens genuinely aware and equipped, understanding what the problem is, and then actively engaging in our democratic process to get some action taken on this.
Thank you so much to the Attention Forum for inviting us to be part of this event, and thanks to all of you for listening to The Amber Mack Show.
You're listening to The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.